I know you have a mantra of support, don't solve. That's actually something we are huge fans of. In fact, it's in our parent tenets too. And so tell me more about that.
When we think about how we show up to conversations and interactions, a lot of times we are so quick to fix and solve and take ownership. And if you think about parenting, if we hear that sigh of distress from our child, if we hear, anything, that is even in the neighborhood of them feeling like, oh, or this is hard, or I'm stressed, or I'm so tired, typically we will jump in and try to alleviate that and soothe that and fix and solve. And you can see that if we're operating not just like that with our children, but with our friends, with those we lead, with those, we educate, and we're constantly showing up and we're activating, empathy, but we're 4 steps ahead. And we're taking, again, some of that false ownership. We're just fueling these micro codependencies and imbalanced relationships. And you can see that when we are programmed to enter these conversations, interactions, looking to fix and solve, it's a perfect recipe for burnout and compassion fatigue, rather than approaching with that stance of, let me meet this person, this situation, this hurdle where it is, and start with validation and keep the ownership with them.
Welcome to the Future of Education podcast, hosted by Mackenzie Price. Mackenzie is the founder of a revolutionary new school model that's disrupting education through AI. Join us as we discuss the latest in education innovation.
Today's episode gets real about one of the quietest crises that we face: burnout, decision fatigue, and endless pressure swirling around modern parenting and education. Parents are constantly trying to choose the best path for our children, which school, which classes, what are the extra activities that we should be having them do, all while also managing our own internal stress and expectations. Not that I have any personal understanding of any of those things at all, right? My guest today is Leah Marone. She's a psychotherapist, a wellness consultant, and an expert in burnout prevention and boundary setting. For the past 20 years, Leah's been guiding individuals, leaders, and families to build resilience, find a healthy balance, and step back into the driver's seats of their lives. And together, we're going to explore how to ease the burden of parenting and education. I think this episode is going to be so helpful for listeners. It's going to be helpful for me too. So Leah, I am so honored to have you here. Thanks for being on Future of Education.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
So Leah, you are a mom. You've got 2 girls, teenagers just like mine. Welcome to the club. I hope it's going smoothly for you. And you're also an expert. You've got a wealth of experience. Just tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get into this line of work?
Yeah. And I'm one of those people that I feel like I have almost 3 or 4 jobs in one, but I think that's how I roll, and it keeps the variety up. But I really am creating space, or hope that I'm creating space, for not just individuals through my clinical practice, where I specialize in anxiety disorders and work with a lot of type A go-getters.
So are you like a PhD, a therapist? What is your...
Psychotherapist. I don't have a PhD. I have my clinicals.
And clinical licensed therapist.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so that's my clinical hat. And then that's brought me to leading webinars and workshops and speaking at conferences on boundary setting, internal, external, resilience, burnout prevention, effective communication. And so that's kind of the macro level. And also, through just being a clinical professor at Yale and working with students.
Whoa, way to drop the Y-bomb. I like it.
Working with students who are, going into a helping field, I think has been a huge privilege. And for the past 5 years in Charlotte, Equitable Foundation does a lot of wellness workshops for educators in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District.
Okay.
And I've had the privilege of being kind of the facilitator of those.
Okay. So you get to work with and you get to know so many educators and the things that they're dealing with. And then do you also have private practice that you deal with individuals?
Right. Yes. And so my clinical days are normally Monday, Tuesday, and that's where I'm doing individual therapy sessions. And then the rest of my week is up for grabs.
So when it comes to your individual therapy sessions, are you seeing families? Do you see moms, dads, kids?
Right. So I specialize in anxiety disorders. So I'm mainly working with teens and above. And I see a lot of athletes as well for performance anxiety.
Oh, really?
And
That's cool.
so I played basketball in college, and so I have a soft spot for that because I was a I was a mess when it came to just performance anxiety. So I love working with that population. And most of my caseload is adults. And
I think the mental strength and attitude of athletes is such a fascinating field of study. And, one of the things, I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine. I was a tennis player growing up, but I wasn't a great tennis player. And there were a few reasons I wasn't great, but one of the reasons was definitely when it would come to like the mental performance. As soon as I would start losing, I'd kind of be like, we have other things to do with the rest of the day. Like, instead of going to 3 sets, why don't we just wrap this thing up, like be done? And I look back and I don't think I identified back then that I did not really have like a killer attitude. Like, I will take this person down no matter what. I was a little more like, if we get out of here soon, we could grab lunch afterwards.
Got my fill.
Okay, so here's a question for you, Leah. We're going to get into the really, really nitty gritty here. What are your thoughts on free throws? And what do you think makes some people good at them, bad at them?
Ooh, it's silencing that inner critic, or aligning with it rather, because it's such a mechanical game. And free throws, you get a free shot without, someone in your face. And it's something that, we practiced all the time, but it's having that rhythm, it's aligning your body and mind, and it's aligning with that critical part of you that tends to chime in and take some real estate. That's like, what if you miss? What if you don't do this right? What if you hear the crowd? And so it's really soothing those parts of you that are there to protect, but also come in and sabotage.
Okay, so you've got one sentence to give my producer, Jay, advice on how to improve his free throws. What's the advice?
Have a free throw. Like, you need to go up there and have something that you do every single time. It builds that self-trust. Yes.
I airballed free throws in high school.
Oh, and now we're sharing some of our trauma, our childhood wounds. I'm so sorry, Jay. Airball. I know what to do now. You've just given me some
ammo.
Anyways, we digress. Let's talk about like a mom who comes to you for practice. Just paint the picture of what are they often struggling with that comes in relation to just trying to manage all of this parenting and they're burnt out. What's that look like?
I think it is. It's juggling a lot of roles, which we know, they're not just a mom. They're a whole bunch of things wrapped into one. And there are a lot of internal pressures. It goes back to, I think, again, those associations that we make with what does a good mom sound like and do and think? And if I'm not feeling the stress and the strain, am I doing it right? Am I working hard enough? And I think the biggest pitfall and what we really go into is, how are you showing up to your roles, relationships, and interactions?
Yeah.
Not even with just your children, but just in general.
Well, I wonder if, because I always think it's interesting, when you interact with other moms, the script is just always like, oh, how are you? Oh, so busy. The kids have this, and I'm driving in the car all the time, and so-and-so's doing this, and by the way, this kid, and there's always a little mix of, got to get some parent bragging in there, right? Of this, we're so busy with college applications, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. I'm busy with these things, and there's a lot. And I think that is very much like the culture of busyness that has been elevated to be respected. I try really hard to not be that person who will go on and on about I'm so busy or how are you? Oh, so busy, so busy. I try really hard to just, shed all of that stuff to like, how are you? And here's what it is. But I think it's a tough culture because it's just what all of us are running the same race, right?
It is. It's just that common narrative and association that we have with it. And you just pointed out an amazing internal conflict of one part of us, and probably the critical part of us is like, you need to be hitting this hard every day. You should be frantic. You should feel like you're juggling 18 balls in the air every day, because if not, you're probably not doing it right, because everyone else is feeling this too. Where the other part of us might be there to preserve our peace and is like, really, again, what are you doing? You get 5 hours of sleep and you're up. And then when you finally get a break, you don't know what to do with it. And you're multitasking even when it comes to your self-care. And so it's like hovering between these two parts of us that are trying very hard to protect and preserve different parts of us.
Yeah, that's hard. And what about educators? What is the most common complaint or challenge that you're hearing from your educators?
I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time to actually kind of be present and enrich and really soak up and create space for the moments that I truly want to be present for
with their students. Oh, if only there were a solution to that.
I know.
If only that role of the teacher could be transformed to be able to focus on connecting with students. I know some schools for that. Yeah. Anyways, I know you have a mantra of support, don't solve. That's actually something we are huge fans of. In fact, it's in our parent tenets too. And so tell me more about that.
When we think about how we show up to conversations and interactions, a lot of times we are so quick to fix and solve and take ownership. And if you think about parenting, if we hear that sigh of distress from our child, if we hear, anything, that is even in the neighborhood of them feeling like, oh, or this is hard, or I'm stressed, or I'm so tired, typically we will jump in and try to alleviate that.
Yes.
And soothe that and fix and solve. And you can see that if we're operating not just like that with our children, but with our friends, with those we lead, with those, we educate, and we're constantly showing up and we're activating, empathy, but we're 4 steps ahead. And we're taking, again, some of that false ownership. We're just fueling these micro codependencies and imbalanced relationships. And you can see that when we are programmed to enter these conversations, interactions, looking to fix and solve, it's a perfect recipe for burnout and compassion fatigue, rather than approaching with that stance of, let me meet this person, this situation, this hurdle where it is, and start with validation and keep the ownership with them.
Yeah. Well, not to mention it completely breaks down the relationship from the other side of the person. And I think one of probably the most interesting parenting lessons that I've learned with my oldest daughter, because she and I, we come at so many things from such different perspectives, that it's helped me have to learn when she is sharing some challenge she's having or something that's going on. The way she approaches it and thinks about it is so foreign to the way I naturally do that it has almost required me to just go, okay, that seems challenging, and to just be there to listen, because my natural tendency is definitely to jump in and try to fix. And actually, my natural desire is for other people to do that with me as well. Like I'm one of those, I don't think it's, they always say the men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And I've always said for me, I love when I have a problem, I tell my husband and I'm like, what should I do? Tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. I think that's partly because I just hate being in misery ever. Like I want to be happy all the time. And so I'm like, whatever you need to do. But I've had to learn that that's not necessarily what a lot of people want. They want to instead just feel heard and seen and acknowledged. And my oldest daughter has been so great in being a teacher for me around that I just have to be there to listen. And that is what builds up so much more trust and connection in a relationship than, oh, let me immediately tell you. Or the other thing that we often do is say, oh, yeah, let me tell you all about my side of it, like what I'm doing with.
Yes. Oh, my gosh. All the time. Yes.
So, Leah, I just heard you say this word, micro codependency. Tell me more. What is that?
Yeah. I mean, I think when we establish that we are kind of the go-to person, which in essence, we actually like in a lot of ways, it makes us feel a sense of purpose. We have this immediate connection. But you think about when we are constantly fixing and solving, and you think about this even in the professional sense. If you're leading a group of people and they know that they can immediately come to you and you will structure, you will fix, you will kind of spoon feed them the information. You're creating these codependencies. You're juggling then all of it. You get the ownership and you're in essence getting the reps to build that self-trust and all those critical thinking skills involved in problem solving. Where if you want to lead effectively, parent effectively, educate effectively, it's about empowering others to get those repetitions in themselves, right? So they can go through those critical thinking skills. They can sift through the different parts of them. They can establish those reps to build ultimately the self-trust so they can do bigger and better things.
Yeah. And when we think about as parents or as educators with our students, we want them to grow up having those skills.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we can shoot ourselves and them in the foot by not doing that. Have you seen the documentary Unknown Number?
I haven't. No.
You haven't?
No.
Well, I will tell you, it's a very interesting story that came out in the last couple of months. But basically, there was a young girl, like 13 years old. She and a boy from school, they were dating. They were a very popular couple, in middle school, basically. And the young girl started getting very, very horrible text messages that were basically just putting her down and saying really, really, when I say atrocious things, I'm talking very nasty, X-rated, terrible things.
Is this right?
Now she ruins my story.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And so then they're trying to figure out, and they change numbers, and the parents of this boyfriend and the girl are trying to figure this out and see what's going on. The school's involved, and they can't do it. It went on for like 2.5 years. It got to the point where sometimes there'd be like 1,000 messages a day coming through. And then ultimately they finally brought the FBI in, and it was the girl's own mother who'd been doing this. So it was like Munchausen syndrome from a mental perspective, because the mom wanted to basically comfort and be kind of the hero and have like a role of comforting this girl. But the things that this mom said to this girl were absolutely unimaginable.
Right. And you nailed it, though. I mean, that was all, the mother's, internal bodyguards and her protectors, whatever you want to call it, were working overtime because it was so hell-bent on that association of like, if I can't comfort my daughter, if I can't soothe, then I'm not doing this right. But in essence, she created all of that chaos in order to then soothe.
Now, that's a very extreme example, but we see this in small ways all the time, right? And it's very something. So what are some of the kind of warning signs? Because I have a feeling there are people listening to this, maybe even people sitting in one of these two blue chairs right here, who might recognize some of these things in themselves. What are some of the things, if you were going down kind of like, hey, if you do this, you might tend to fall this, and you could then be at risk of burnout?
Right. I mean, I think a lot of it is, you create space for other people, but have a hard time opening up yourself. You tend to be confused or even resentful because you're putting so much effort into your relationships, but you don't feel like it's working, and you find this imbalance. I think we have to remember that this generally comes from a good place. This does come from a place of trying to be helpful, to connect, to empathize, to soothe. But in essence, sometimes it's that compassion disguised as control, right? And I think too, because of the pace of how we're living, sometimes, especially as parents, it's so nice to be like, ooh, I can check that off. They're fine. That's taken care of. I can move on to the next thing. And so I think that's a big thing. I will say resentment, if you're experiencing any resentment, whether it's in your relationship, your primary relationships, your role, profession, anything having to do with resentment, your boundaries are not strong enough. And boundaries, again, are something that you control for yourself. It's not about setting boundaries with the hope that everyone will just fall in line. It's about collecting your own data and applying and recognizing some discomfort that this isn't working for you, and then trying and taking these little steps to build new ways to show up and to do do things differently.
Yeah. So resentment is very much a sign of something. If this thought ever goes through your head, like, I control you because I love you, that could be a sign. Okay, so somebody says, okay, I'm seeing maybe some of these patterns that I might do, and I'm feeling this way about certain relationships, with my child. What is the process you take them through to help kind of loosen those shackles?
Yes. I think the biggest thing is to really do the work internally. And so much of us really cloud that work or move on or kind of numb ourselves with people's external problems. Like, oh, well, I have to do this. I have to do that. I don't want to set time aside for me because I don't need it. I feel guilty if I do it. So I'm going to make sure that I show up and continue to do X, Y, and Z because this makes me feel connected and purposeful, and I don't have to do what's in here.
Let me ask you a question, Leah, because I do think there's another side of this that has become so popular in our culture, which is the whole self-care, self-love. And I have to be honest, I've seen people who take that so far in a way that, in my opinion, is also very unhealthy. How do you balance that to make sure that you're not having this, like, what I almost find a vacuous, it's like, I'm always protecting, this, and I've got to protect my space, and you're hurting my... Yeah, right.
Thank you for that.
You're
No, yeah.
hurting my boundaries. You're overstepping onto my boundaries, and I no longer feel. And honestly, I don't think that's a great place to be either. And so, how do you handle this? Because you go on Instagram and you'll see someone telling you about how important it is to own your space and block people out of your life who don't bring positivity and all that. And then at the same time, we're also tend to be the ones who are tripping over ourselves to try to be helpful and do for others. How do you balance that?
Boundaries are, yes. I mean, you nailed it, because boundaries are not something, it's not a shield. It's not something that we can create this cozy, predictable environment, because that actually breeds anxiety, you know? And so boundaries, again, are not this like, well, this is uncomfortable for me, so I'm just not going to do it. No, I think boundaries too are just acknowledging, and that's why I say kind of approaching interactions and relationships differently. You're actually in real time doing one of the most effective boundaries ever, because you're not taking false ownership and overexerting and being 4 steps ahead of everyone and carrying the weight of others in a way that's not productive for them or you.
Well, I wonder if this is true. I'm going to be kind of an armchair therapist for a second and check me if this is right. Because what I feel like I heard you say is it's almost in the attitude that you bring into a relationship with someone else, where it, you know, I think on the over extreme self-care side, it's always about me. And maybe the better way to look at it is, what is it that I'm really trying to be and impact this person for? And sometimes if you say, okay, I am all about this other person to a point that I am steamrolling them to try to make my, show my impact, that's a problem.
That's right.
But if you're saying, how can we come through this relationship? How can we interact in a place that's going to be mutually beneficial?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've gone into a lot of like the theoretical around this, but let's get into the nitty gritty. I always think examples are good. And I'm going to start with an example that I can't even believe I'm still having to deal with with a 17-year-old daughter, but it is. And so the reason I think this is a great example is because I think parents probably have this happening with their 6-year-old, their 10-year-old, their 15-year-old, and their 17-year-old. It's the keeping your room clean example. And now when I say clean, I mean don't have food products on the floor that the dog can eat. Those types of things. There's like, in general, I've tried to be someone who's a little bit relaxed on like maintaining the space. But even if you are a mom who's like, no, I insist a room be a certain way or whatever, how would you give me this thought on how to interact in this? And how do you set the right boundaries with your kids?
Yeah. So first of all, I guess I'd love to just ask you kind of what association do you have with a clean room? How is that impacting you if your child doesn't keep their room up to what you view as a high standard?
I think for me, it's not so much that I have a high standard as that I have a minimum standard that isn't always being met. And so it can cause challenges around just walking into a room and seeing, things that I'm like, this is almost dirty as opposed to just being messy. So, ramen noodles from 3 days before sitting in a bowl, something like that. To me, it's very hard for me to not put that as a boundary of like, you must do this. And of course, the way I then sometimes approach it, which is out of frustration, is not the right thing.
Yeah. I want you to actually answer the question though.
Ooh, actually answer the question. Didn't I talk my way through that so much that I don't even remember the question?
You took a little detour,
Let's move
but
on
that's
to
okay.
the next question. Okay, so the question is what?
What association do you have with a space within your home that's up to par and how that impacts you as a homeowner and as a mother?
I think ultimately what it probably reflects on for me and the association I have is that I have a child who can't maintain a base level of decency, which what it does for me is it starts calling into like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when she has a roommate or a husband, or something like that. Or she's wanting to, I think it also for me, it probably brings up resentment because she's done things like say, oh, I need a new furniture set to make my room look great. And then you don't even notice the beautiful things that have been done because they're covered in that. So I do believe there's some level of vanity that I feel like it's reflecting on me, and a lack of appreciation is what it is.
No, that's great. And you're not alone. And I think a lot of people are probably hearing that and nodding along. And it's interesting because you're kind of feeling the emotional weight and the natural consequences, if you will, of the state and the flow of what's happening with the room. Your daughter knows that probably every few days or once a week, you're going to come in and try to structure that and remind her and maybe say, all right, it's been 3 days and we have the ramen bowl again. And so you're carrying the weight of most of that, and she can kind of wait for you to structure. And in return, she still, has a beautiful space and has kind of the things that she has requested. And so really there's not much negative reactions or consequences that she bears the brunt of, right? You'll see this too with even parents that are very involved with the stress of the to-dos and assignments and project that, their child has to do. And the parent is carrying the emotional weight of that. Well, you have this due Friday. How are you going to do this? Well, you really should turn off the TV and do X, Y, and Z. The kid doesn't have to go through any of those repetitions of structuring and then having the emotional burden or the consequences of telling their educator, their guide, their teacher that I didn't do that. I didn't get to that. Because they know that mom or dad, they can fall back on the structuring skills of mom and dad. And so in order for us to kind of keep ownership of things, we have to feel sometimes the discomfort associated with them.
Yeah. So what does that mean if we take that example? It's just, do I wait to the point where it's so filthy that, the dog's gone in and made a mess from the food that's there, and then she's got to clean it up, which she doesn't because the dog cleans it up, and then he gets sick, and then I clean it up.
Okay. So there you go. So you, again, walked through a bunch of steps where you still have ownership of that, and you feel the brunt of the cleanup and this and that. And she just kind of gets to sit back and the pattern repeats itself. So something that might be helpful is having a conversation with her where you're using your I statements, and you can say, I'm very frustrated because I feel like we've had the same interaction now for years about the state of your room. And I'm curious what you've heard me say every, week when I check in. What do you hear me say? What's the message that you receive? Put some of the work onto her. And she might go, well, you just want my room clean, or you don't want the dog to eat stuff.
Yeah.
And you might ask her and probe her a bit more and say, so does that make sense? Or I'm curious, how we can't align with that. I want you to walk me through what your standards are for your living space. Because clearly we're not on the same page.
No, and she's been very clear that her standards are not the same as mine.
Right.
So in that situation, that's okay. This is her space.
So I think it is something when the dog eats whatever and maybe has an accident wherever. That's not yours. And I know that's going to be very much I have to go
how
clean
can you
that
tell
up.
my head's exploding right now, Leah?
I know.
I don't understand.
But this is too where if you're kind of, again, creating those micro codependencies and you're feeling the brunt and you're swooping in to kind of, take the natural consequences of the situation, it's going to keep going. Right? So it's making that hard decision and setting that boundary that I've collected enough data, actually over the years, that she is just not going to clean her room the way I'd like to and when I'd like her to. And so guess what? When there's things that happen because of this, I am not going to swoop in and carry the brunt of that. Yeah. And you see then how she responds to that. And when she has friends over and there's a pee stain on the carpet or there's X, Y, and Z, she will have to be the one that answers that. She will have to be the one that makes a decision. Do I want to have friends over in this space? Hey, Mom. And you're like, good luck.
Thanks for listening to Mackenzie Price and the Future of Education podcast. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, now is the time to do it so you can stay up to date on all our episodes. You can connect with Mackenzie on social media and be part of our daily conversation over on Instagram at futureof_education. For more info about the show and our guests, you can always visit futureofeducationpod.com. Lastly, if you're loving what you're learning, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back in your feed soon, but until then, remember, kids are limitless, and it's our job to unlock their potential. That wraps up part 1 of this episode, but don't worry, there's a part 2 coming soon.